I don't see myself.
Uh-oh, is Jen stuck?
Am I stuck?
Oh, there you are.
But I don't see myself.
We see you.
We see you.
Okay, well then I'm just going to pretend that we're ready to go then.
I got a little live sticker up in the right-hand corner, so I think we're good to go.
Okay, well, I just wanted to welcome everybody to the Master the Media, How Teaching Media Literacy Can Save Our Plugged-In World by Julie Smith, Google Hangout. Woo! Today, talking about media literacy. Today, we have Julie Smith with us, the author of the book. She's a full-time Webster University professor, staff member. She actually has an office this year. That's so exciting, no longer having to live out of the car. We also have Tisha Clausen, the Oliver Primary Librarian, who is an empty nester finally for a while and is enjoying lots of time hammocking and reading these days. And I am Jennifer Baldwin, this K-12 librarian at Jasper in Southwest Missouri. So, Julie, let's toss it to you. And can you give us just a brief summary of the book?
Well, you know, describing anything briefly is a challenge for me, Jen. The book, a boring title of the book would be a media literacy starter kit for teachers and parents. My goal was to make media literacy accessible to people who are raising children and people who are teaching children. So get it out of the ivory tower, get it out of the textbooks, and make it readable and accessible for people who are interested in the topic, but really not quite sure how to do it. So that's my summary of the book. One thing that I really like about it, because, you know, when I was talking about doing the book with the publisher, Dave Burgess, I said, you know, if you publish a book about the media, it's going to be outdated like right when it gets printed, right? Because the media changes every day. So he had the great idea of inserting dynamic QR codes at the end of every chapter so that I can update the book as things change and also include all the resources that I use in my own classrooms and with the kids that live in my house. So I think it's kind of fun. So it makes it almost interactive, so that it will hopefully never be out of style. Well, out of style is the wrong word, but out of date.
Sounds like a book that I've wanted to read and have read a couple of different times, especially this summer. Let's just really define what you think media literacy is and isn't, and we'll kind of go back and forth and maybe add thoughts that we have.
Okay. It's almost easier to describe what it's not. I think a lot of people assume that if you teach media literacy, you're teaching media bashing, which some days is very easy to do, right? There's some aspects of the media that are very easy to bash. But really what it is just an analysis of something that we're spending so much time with. The average American now is spending between 11 and 11 and a half hours a day with the electronic mass media. So if you're media literate, you're not saying that that is a bad thing necessarily. You're saying, hey, if we're spending so much time with something, maybe we should study it and analyze it and ask questions about it. So media literacy is a skill that involves having students ask questions about the messages that they're consuming. Who's the sender of the message? What's their motive or intent? What tips and tricks and media are they using to give me that message? What are they leaving out? Who profits from the message? Could other people interpret the message differently from me? These basic kind of questions that I really would love to see everybody get into the habit of asking. Oh, another great question to ask these days is it accurate? And what tools can I use to determine if it's accurate or not? So it's all about asking questions and analyzing. It's not criticism necessarily, it's evaluation. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me.
I think that's one of the biggest things I took away from the book was the fact that it's really all about evaluating all the different styles of media that are out there. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges for understanding how to effectively evaluate, especially things that are changing so quickly, like on the internet or live social media?
Oh gosh, well, the volume of media, I think, makes it very difficult to stop and analyze and reflect on, right? Because there's just so much of it. Neil Postman wrote in 1985 that we were in an information glut, where there's just so much information that we don't know what's real and meaningful and valid and true. It's impossible for us to tell. So I think the volume is a roadblock. I think that many teachers and parents kind of take the media for what it is without necessarily analyzing it for the economic powerhouse of our culture that it is. And I think that sometimes we are reluctant to acknowledge the biases that we bring to the experience. Especially when we're consuming news, you know, depending on what our political views are, I think sometimes it's hard to be objective when we're consuming information because of our own baggage that we bring. So there are a lot of roadblocks, and for teachers especially. I mean, I'm lucky that I get to teach a freestanding media literacy course, and I do that at the university level now, and I did it right out of graduate school when I was teaching high school. So I'm fortunate. A lot of teachers will say, yes, it's important. I can see why it's important, but where do we put it? And that's what I think is one of the challenges. There really is no place to put it because it fits everywhere. You can include it in every classroom. And I know the librarians have so much pressure on them now, especially with media literacy. I would like to see media literacy spread throughout the building and not just on the shoulders of the librarians, because it really is applicable for science class, health class, math class, history, you name it, and there's some sort of media literacy lesson that can be implemented. Not more work necessarily, just different. And no matter what grade you're teaching or how old the kids are or what the subject is, you can still insert some media literacy in there. So I think that's one way to kind of overcome one of those roadblocks, at least.
That is an excellent way to lead me into my favorite part of the entire time I've ever talked to you, Julie, and even reading the book. You give so many great ideas to teach media literacy across the curriculum. Do you mind sharing some of those, not only by content area, but also grade levels? Like, what can we do?
Oh, sure.
Little big versus our high school students.
Right, or the college students.
Right.
And it really is just starting with basic questions. If you have, primary kids, you could just show maybe some packaging or some ads. Why do you think there's always animated creatures on these packages? Tell me what you think about the colors. What do the kids look like? You're not necessarily helping the kids criticize the content. You're looking for awareness at this point. You just want the kids to be aware that most of the media is trying to sell them something, and how are they doing that? What makes them so effective at doing that? It could be something simple like going through, next time you're in the grocery store, count how many things have SpongeBob on it, or one of the Frozen characters, right? Something as simple as that, where then when you get a little bit older, you could talk maybe about the differences between the ads that are in 17 magazine compared to the ads in Cosmopolitan, and why are they different? It's like that's advertising, for example, but I'm trying to think, like, if you want to talk about food advertisements in health class, liquor and tobacco advertisements when you get older, and ways to analyze those. Or history, for example. Is it okay to watch a movie about something that happened in history and assume that that's, I'm so sorry. Sorry about that. Can you show a movie in history class and maybe have the students critique what happened in the movie to see if it was really factual or not? That sort of thing. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it depending on, no matter what the age level is. And I know I kind of went off topic there, Jen, sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. That's a great example of the different ways that you can teach it as you go, as the child matures. What are some ways to teach it in math class? What are some ways? You always have great ideas that just pop out, like using charts and graphs and science and social.
One of the funnest things that I like to do in one of my media literacy classes, and this is kind of subversive, I give them a bunch of statistics and then challenge them to make misleading charts and graphs based on those statistics. So I show them some charts and graphs that are pretty misleading and designed specifically to mislead, right? And then encourage them to make their own using all different Web 2.0 tools or Adobe or something. Once they create their own misleading chart or graph or infographic and they see how easy it is, they never consume one the same way again. And I think that's a great math activity. I mean, of course, there's always lots of math errors in the news that you could always have the kids critique, but the charts and graphs is a great place to start, especially for visual learners in your classroom, because that's how they consume information. And once they see how easy it is to manipulate a chart or graph, I don't think that their consumption of that information is ever the same.
Tisha, can you think of any questions that you have that have led?
One of the things that came up in the Twitter discussion the other night was the difference in trying to just create awareness at the primary levels to really beginning to get to that level where we're evaluating and critiquing and with those middle school and high school. But I think one of the things that really stood out to me was just becoming aware of all the different sources of media. And throughout the book, I like how you really just chunked each chapter to highlight the different media sources. So what are some of those sources that do you feel that maybe people take for granted as not really being sources of media?
Oh gosh. You know, and isn't that kind of a fun question to ask students, is what do you consider the media? Because when I ask my college students that, they never think about billboards or terrestrial radio, because nobody listens to terrestrial radio anymore, right? Or even the fact that they might all be wearing Webster University t-shirts or sweatshirts or Nike, or the way they decorate their laptops. They tend to not realize that sometimes they themselves are billboards for products. And so the awareness, I think, it doesn't necessarily get easier. Obviously, everybody says, oh, well, the internet, television, radio, movies. But, you know, we need to think about advertising in all of its different forms. Book publishing, magazine publishing, that's still significant. It's really interesting, too. A lot of the students, like when I do talks to middle schoolers, they'll say, oh, well, Facebook is a medium. I'm like, yeah, that's true, but it travels through the web, right? So it's interesting to see how I don't think they can really figure it out how it all works together yet. And it's because we're still in the thick of it, right? It's going to take a while for all of us to kind of figure out how this all works and interchanges with each other.
Well, one of the things there was social media. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, I don't know if it was at Mazel or if it was in one of the chapters of the book, was that you were talking about how who's the producer and who is the benefactor. And I think that's one of the big things that is important when teaching social media awareness to our students, is understanding who the producer is, but yet who the benefactor is of that product.
Isn't that true? And I'm not sure that even adults realize that if they are using a free app or website, then they are the product being sold. Our eyeballs are the product on television. The content of the television is not the product sold to us. We are being sold to the advertisers. And it's the same with the online experience. All of the personal information that we give all these websites, of course, is sold and then turned around and marketed back to us. And I think we're just at the beginning edge of really helping students understand how that works, because I don't think, you know, we can talk about advertising analysis and how music is used in movies, but I think the next big step in media literacy for K-12 is to talk to kids about the economic structure and what happens with all of this money. Where does it all go? What does it mean? And how does it influence us in the long run? Because we leave trails wherever we go, right? And I think it's so important for students to realize that, but it's hard to teach. hard to teach.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I personally like about the book is because it's so easy to read and it just flows so naturally, but you also include the things that we could possibly do at home to teach our own children some of the media literacy things. What are some of your top tips for as a parent that we can do? You give tips throughout the book for classroom teachers as well as teaching, but it's always nice to make that home connection.
Right. And you know what? I think that the home suggestions would be very, very similar to my classroom suggestions. My family and I have 3 teenage boys, and we always watch The Walking Dead together, right? It's something that we do together as a family. And I remember one time one of them said to me, Mom, could we just watch this without you asking questions all the time? And I said, no, no, we can't, because I want that to be natural, right? So when we're consuming media at home with children, depending on the age, of course, I think it's completely appropriate to say, how does that message make you feel? What do you think they're trying to do? You think they're trying to sell you something? Do kids really look like that at your school? How do you think, what do you think about how that kid just spoke to that adult? How come principals and teachers in television shows are always morons? Well, how come dads are always bumbling? What do you think about that? Like, why do the families on TV never look like the families you see at the grocery store? Just very basic questions. Now, it can get tricky because, you know, it's easy to say everything on television is a construction, right? A result of a lot of different production decisions. But then if we're watching a baseball game, that's really happening, right? But still there are people making decisions about what commercials we're going to see, what camera angles we're going to be shown, what the announcers are going to say. So ask questions constantly. And as the kids get older, say, what are they trying to sell you? What do you think the message is here? Do you ever, and if you're talking about social media in particular, do you ever feel the whole compare and despair? Do you get fear of missing out? Are there apps that make you maybe feel inadequate? Like we were talking about how Pinterest makes us feel, right? What are some coping skills that you have for when you have a negative online experience? Do you know how to cope with a troll? How strong are your passwords? What are your qualifications for online connections? Do you feel pressure to act in a certain way when you're online? Do you feel like you're your authentic self online? I mean, the questions can get deeper and more complex as the kid gets older, but I think that the questioning itself just should start at birth and go forever. Start in the delivery room. You know, it's so natural for them. You know, there's all these news stories and studies saying that children are so good at using technology. But that's true. You know, they do use it naturally. They seem to come by it very naturally, but that doesn't mean they're analyzing how they are using the technology or how the technology is using them. One time I lost my mind on Twitter because someone tweeted out, well, I teach media literacy. We have iPads in the classroom. Like, no, that's not, that doesn't count. You can use iPads to teach media literacy, but media literacy is not ed tech. It's analysis of the messages and constantly asking questions. Yeah.
Tisha, do you have any other questions? I have a couple more, but I don't want to take over the conversation. So
you go, Jen.
Well, I know that you've mentioned a couple of different times of social media, and that's a buzzword. Let's talk real briefly about other buzzwords. I think in my mind, fake news, for instance.
Oh, yes. Fake news is one of my favorite phrases right now because it's great job security for me, teaching media literacy, because lots of people are so interested in fake news and how to determine what's real and what's not. So it's a challenge, right? I think one of the issues with, and I'm using air quotes, fake news, is that sometimes we use it to describe messages that we don't like. It's kind of like the B word, bullying, right? Mm-hmm. And how kids now use that, you know, hey, will you please put your phones away? It's not bullying me, right? It's like they use it now to describe any communication that they don't really like. And I think fake news has kind of gotten the same reputation. But there are definite tools that we can use online to determine the validity of online information. I think some of the problems, again, are the sheer volume of information. And if it's a message that we agree with, we are less likely to check it for authenticity. So there are very similar roadblocks to fake news as the roadblocks to regular media literacy in general. But critical thinking, it all boils down to critical thinking. And that's what we want for our kids, right? We want them to be critical consumers of all these messages. And I tell my students all the time, be skeptical, skeptical, skeptical of everything, even what your professors say. Double check it. Be skeptical. You just want to make sure that skepticism doesn't roll over into cynicism, because cynicism is no fun.
Well, I'm looking at our time and it's gone by so quickly.
Oh my gosh.
I know. I'm like, oh my goodness. So I guess we need to start wrapping up. I'm going to turn it really over to you, Julie, so that you can just kind of give your last things and include things that you were like, oh, I'm sure they're going to ask this and we didn't. I'll just turn it over to you.
If I could talk to teachers in Missouri, I would ask them to include as much media literacy questions in their classrooms as possible, regardless of what they're teaching, regardless of how old the kids are. We want the kids to be aware of the messages, and then as they get older, analyze how those messages make them feel and who's profiting from those messages and what it all means. And like I said before, not only how the kids are using media, but how the media is using them. I think that's a significant question. For digital citizenship classes, I would really, really encourage teachers to get away from preaching and move more towards coaching. The kids are going to be online, so let's coach them on how to do that well and effectively. Let's give them tools like Google reverse image search, set up Google alerts for their names, teach them how to have a really good digital identity so that when they Google their own name, that whole first page is nothing but stuff that's great that they have put up themselves. That's what we want for our kids, right? So less preaching, more coaching is something that I would definitely suggest when it comes to social media. It's tough when it comes to news consumption. I always get asked, where's a good place to get news? And usually I say it doesn't matter where you get your news as long as you know where it's coming from, and try to get it from more than one source. But that's tough because we like to hear messages that affirm what we already feel and believe. So that's a challenge. Teachers have such an enormous challenge, and because we expect teachers to do everything. I mean, we expect them to raise our children essentially, and that's not fair. I would hope that they view media literacy as an opportunity and not just something else that we think they ought to do. It's really easy and fun, and it'll increase classroom engagement. And if anyone wants specific suggestions about how to implement media literacy in their classroom, they can reach me. My website is heyjuliesmith.com, or I'm also at heyjuliesmith@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to help anybody anytime, because media literacy is my favorite thing in the world.
That is a perfect way, and I know that I have a couple of different as well to say, hey Julie, and on Twitter and things like that. So I appreciate the time that you have taken, Tisha. I appreciate the time you have taken. MSTA, thank you so much for sponsoring this type of book club. I know I have enjoyed getting to meet the authors, spend more time with them, ask questions, and really interact on Twitter as well as these Google Hangouts. And I know that there were planning on doing more throughout the fall. So with that, Tisha, do you have anything else?
Just a big thank you to everybody for coming. And Julie, thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom with us, both in the book and online today.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled, and I'm excited that I'll hopefully get to meet you all in person at MSTA.
That would be wonderful.
Yay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I think our live broadcast will end.